Hello YouTube, I'm Andrew, or Turbo, is depending on which name you know me by. And today we're going to do a little kite flying. I figured wind's kind of light, so I might as well make a how-to video. I've been doing power kiting for a couple years now. I'm by no means any expert, but figured I'd share what knowledge I do have. Some of you have been wondering about it, so it's a little light wind today, so hopefully we can get it worked out, but we'll see. So here's my kite. It is a 7.5 meter parafoil made by HQ Kites. I was just in the process of setting it up here, clearing my lines. For those of you who don't know anything about power kites, kites are measured by their square meterage or square footage, depending on how you want to look at it, but they're all classified by square footage, or by square meterage. So 7.5 square meters. I don't know what that translates to in a square foot kind of stance, but it's that big, kind of. You'll see it when it gets up in the air, hopefully. But what I'm doing now is I'm clearing my lines, so I'm going through, making sure none of my lines are tangled. So when I first get it in the air, nothing gets all tangled up. I'm making sure the lines on top are the ones supposed to be on top, the ones on bottom are supposed to be on bottom. So here's how you do that. Grab all 4 lines and you walk towards your handles. You make sure none of I got a half twist in my left one here, but hopefully it'll unsolve it, or it'll solve itself down here. And there it goes. So it looks like everything's clear. That's one of the worst things that can happen to you if you're flying a big kite. People get injured that way pretty easily. We got about around 5 to 7 miles an hour wind out here today. It's not much. I like to fly with a little over 10, but we'll see what we can do. So I'll explain some of the other things as we get the kite in the air here. Let's see if we can. I gotta wait for the right gust. These lines I'm holding in my hand, separate here. These are called the power lines. They go to the front of the kite, the front 2 corners, and the other 2, the red and blue, they go to the back 2 corners. The power lines are what supply all the power and support, which is why I have to wear a harness here. They directly connect into my harness, and then the brake lines, the blue and the red, they connect to the handle here, both sides, and that's how you steer the kite. We got a little gust here. See if we can get this going. I'm gonna have to go reposition it. I'm not bothering to stake it down because there's not enough wind. Usually I would stake it down if there's more wind, just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, but I'm having trouble just getting it in the air today, so probably won't even have the board out, but at least we can do some flying, hopefully. These are definitely not the kind of kites you just want to go grab off the shelf and go flying. First of all, they'll drain your bank account. This one used cost me, I think it was around $750, and that's not even on the expensive side of the kites in the kite world. But more importantly, you can really injure yourself really easily because they pull so hard. It's when this kite decides it wants you off the ground, you don't argue with it, you just go. So you better be prepared for it. Today I don't think that's going to happen, but this kite has thrown me through the air a good 15 feet or so, just on a gust. So anyway, what I'm doing here, I'm holding the front lines in my hand because as I grab the front of the kite, it'll pop up first. And I want to give it a little extra help with the front lines here, if we ever get a good gust here to bring it up. If you want to get into kites and power kites, and you want to fly on a light wind day, this is a lot of the day waiting around. We're at a school today. Schools a lot of times have the nicest fields for this kind of stuff. The Grass is usually pretty smooth, especially if you have a mountain board like I do. That really helps things. You don't want to be running over a bunch of potholes and divots and whatnot. I'm still not very good on the board, but sand is the best. But unfortunately in the state of Washington, they're still working on legislation to make it legal to actually use the boards, or any wind-powered vehicle for that matter, on the beaches. It seems really strange, but them are the laws. There we go. Once you get it up in the air, it's usually a lot easier because the wind up top is usually a little better. But as I'm flying it here, you can see I'm steering it with the brake lines. And what I had to do there, it's called a hot launch. It's basically launching straight into the wind. It's typically a no-no for big power kites, because what can happen is you're launching it into the most powerful section of the wind. But for today, the wind's so light, I really don't have much of a choice. Might lose all wind here. One of the things about these big kites is right now the wind has died down, but I'm still flying it because the wind has, or the kite has forward momentum. It works a lot like an aircraft wing in that it generates lift as it moves through the air. So as long as the kite is moving through the air, it's still pulling on the lines and therefore still moving forward. As long as it keeps moving forward, it'll still generate lift, it'll keep going. I can't quite do it with this one, but some of the really big kites, the 20 meters and up, as long as you can get them in the air, usually you can keep flying them no matter what, because they'll keep generating their own lift essentially. What I'm doing now is I'm messing with my trim strap that just barely adjusts the angle of the kite, trying to get just a little more lift out of it. There we go. Now it's tugging me. But this kite setup, it's called a D-power kite. And what that means is, as I pull on this bar here, I'm not going to do it too much because I don't want it to stop, it reduces the power of the kite. So essentially right now I'm flying around at 100% power all the time. And as I pull on the bar, pull it closer to me, that powers down the kite in a sense because it's pulling on the brake lines. A traditional setup is backwards of what I have. The power lines are actually on the outsides of the bar and the brake lines are down the center. And those, the way those work is you're only applying power to the kite as you're pulling on the bar. I think lazy circles is all we're going to really get out of this today, unfortunately. But it's tugging nicely. As long as you can fly, it's not a bad day. Whoop, whoop, here's a little trouble. And of course it's gonna land right on my backpack. So I'm gonna go untangle that. One thing, if you want to get into this as a sport, definitely have some safety gear lined out. Good helmet. I found I have a snowboarding helmet actually that I'm wearing right now. Nice thing about that is if I want to listen to some music, it has built-in speakers, so you can listen to some music while you're out here flying. I have some elbow pads with me, but again, I'm not wearing them. The wind just doesn't warrant it today. And then I have some kind of easy knee pads going on that I do have on. One thing for you not kite flying people out there, It's a lot of times misunderstood. If you're around a kite flyer, where you should be and where you shouldn't be. But really the big rule is, if you're around a kite flyer, anywhere that kite can reach, you should not be. Because that, you never know where that kite's gonna go. And these lines, like this kite pulls me off the ground. So there's 180 pounds of force, you know, yanking me at least, usually more. So imagine that line with essentially a fishing wire. It'll cut straight into your skin, no problem. So if you're around a kite flyer, and especially a big kite flyer, just don't even come anywhere close to where the kite can go. If you're upwind of them, that's fine. You can come up to a kite flyer upwind, come up from behind them. That seems a little weird sometimes, but that's the right way to do it, because then you're not putting yourself in a spot where you're in danger. For picking a good location for your kite flying, a lot of times you want to avoid places with tall trees surrounding them. The trees will create what's called a wind shadow, and so even if there's a big field right next to a whole bunch of trees, the trees will mess with the wind coming into the field. Usually what happens is it gets really jerky. So there's a few trees around this one, but as you can see them, they're pretty open. There's no foliage on them right now, and they're spaced pretty far apart. I'm not too worried about them, but as you can see way off in the distance there, that's the kind of tree line that would really mess with you. Power lines, of course, there's some over here. Never fly under power lines, it's just a bad idea. I'm not worried about these because the wind's pushing me away from them. If it was going the other way, I might not fly here today. There we go. The way these kites work, they only hold their shape when there's air in the kite. So they create that wing shape, but they can only do that when there's wind or where there's air in them, so they have to inflate. A lot of the kites if you ever see kite surfers doing it in the ocean, they'll have what's called leading edge inflatables. And those kites, they actually have a bladder in the leading edge of the kite that inflates. And that does two things. It creates that wing shape, and it also, if they have to down the kite in the water, it'll make sure the kite floats and they can relaunch it while they're in the water. Since I just do land-based stuff, I actually don't need that. Let's see if we can do a reverse launch here. My kite's upside down right now. I don't think it's going to happen, but you usually, if you have enough wind, you can actually launch it upside down. So the trailing edge will come up into the wind first, and then you can flip it upside down. Unfortunately, you need a little more wind than I think I have out here today. I'm going to wait just a little bit and see if I can get a gust so I can do that. Well, maybe. There's backwards. And I don't think I might have enough to flip it over. That's the hardest part. Nope. So we're going to go fix it. There we go. Back in business. Having to walk backwards a little bit here. That's another trick you can do, is pulling on the power lines, but stay up there. I don't know if that's going to work right now. Every once in a while you got days like this, they're just kind of frustrating. You end up 1,000 yards back from where you started. There we go, nice little gust there. And now it's pulling. There's some good wind up where it is, about 50 feet up there. So if you're wondering about safety and these things being attached to you, it does take a little getting used to going from a normal kite The nice thing is, since all the power is going straight to my hips because I'm wearing a harness, my arms are not nearly as tired as they would be flying a traditional kite without a harness. But so there's 3 main safety systems on this kite, and all kites are a little different, but they typically have at least 2 of them. The first one is the brake lines that are attached to the bar I have in my hands. If you see this extra line dangling down, that's actually kind of an emergency brake line. It'll pull on the brakes a lot harder and therefore deflate the kite faster than it does just pulling on the bar itself. The second one is this little red knob here. If I pull that, what happens is the front 2 lines, the power lines, they don't detach, but they get about a foot longer. And because of that, the kite, instead of facing into the wind, then goes away from the wind, and it deflates it essentially instantly. So there's no more power at all. If you're in a situation where you're like 10 feet off the ground, pulling that knob is not a good idea, because then you just plummet to earth. It's much better to have the kite bring you down gently, if that's an option. Sometimes it's not. You get these crazy gusts of wind. And then the third one I have is actually down here. This one, that is a complete release. It will release me from the kite entirely. So if I'm heading straight towards the power lines or something, that's the one to pull. We actually got a little bit of nice wind going here. It's a little gusty. That is one thing about these kites, is it's typically not the best idea to be flying them in some really gusty winds, because it's just so unpredictable. One of the guys that taught me actually had broken a couple of ribs when a gust caught him wrong and just threw him to the ground. The gusts are always the worst thing, and you can feel them coming too. You can feel the kite powering up to pull you, and there's just not a whole lot you can do about it a lot of times. Actually got a nice little wind going here now. Woo! So essentially, the faster the kite's moving through the air, the more power it's generating. Or the faster the air is moving over the kite, I guess I should say, because it doesn't really matter if the kite's moving or if the wind's moving over it. That's all gonna generate power. And maybe I can show you a few things now. You can do full loops with this thing. And the nice thing about that, if you can see my lines crossed right now, now they're not. You can just spin the whole handle around. You don't have to reverse course with the kite. You don't want to do that too much, because the lines themselves will be twisting. So you don't want to put a million twists one direction in your lines. Especially as I get down to the ground there, it's pulling me a lot harder. Here's another thing I'll show you real quick. What I'm about to show you is called overflying. And what can happen with these kites, they generate so much lift and they want to move forward so much that you can actually fly over your head, straight up and over. And when that happens, then the wind's hitting the kite wrong and it deflates and just kind of flags. It's called flag when they're waving around like a flag. Here's a little gust here. Give those power lines a tug and it'll inflate again. If you saw it there, it deflated, so it didn't have that shape. I can actually show you again. That's deflated, and that's going to inflate again and move forward. So my kite, it generally likes a little over 10 miles an hour, somewhere between about 10 and I'd say about 17 is where I like to fly it. I can fly it as low as about 5 miles an hour, which you'll barely feel on your skin if you're standing in it. I have flown kites where you can't even feel the wind. One of the guys that taught me had if I remember right, it was a 22 meter kite. So it was over double what this kite is. Ooh. and that thing, we flew it in, you could just barely feel the wind. You had to be concentrating on it too. But that thing actually was tugging me across a field with that little wind because it had so much surface area. Surface area isn't everything. There is a design element to the kites. I used to have a kite. Oh, you're not gonna do this to me. Here's a perfect opportunity to do a reverse launch, hopefully. Now it's gonna turn over. Nope. I can get this going before the wind dies on me. Get it to turn over at least. Oh, this might be a mess. Yeah, we just lost all wind there. Well, the wind is getting a little stronger. I am going to stake it this time. So what you do when you stake it is you put your power loop and your brake line together and put your stake through the middle of both of them. So if the wind picks the kite while you're away from the handles, it'll basically be at 0% power because the brakes are all the way on. And if you are in a windy situation, one of the no-nos is you should stay away from the lines as you're walking out to the kite, because if the wind does pick it up while you're walking and you're on top of those lines, you ever want to have kids, you hopefully aren't on top of the lines. The lines on this kite, if I remember right, are 500-pound test line. So they will actually, each one of them that is going down to the handle can pick up 550 pounds, or 500, I don't remember. But if you're wondering why so much, if I only weigh 180, you're not going to see a 500-pound guy flying these. Really the reason is because of the shock loads. So if the kite decides to pick you up all at once, the load on the lines is actually much more than what you weigh. So while all together, these lines are approaching 1 ton of weight capacity, you don't come close to that, or you definitely don't need all of that, but it's there because of the shock loads, and especially if you hit a really hard gust and all of your weight is transferred onto one line, which doesn't always happen, but it can. You want that extra buffer there so you don't end up breaking a line. I don't know if you can see it, but my lines, they look like they're all tangled now. But I know what's going on. Actually, I just have to get tension on the lines, get the kite in the air, and it'll straighten itself out. And now the wind's gonna die on me again. This is what happens when you're flying a big kite sometimes. The beach is by far my favorite place to fly. The winds are really steady all day long. Anytime you get inland, you can, it's kind of hit or miss. I used to fly in Ellensburg, and it was fairly gusty there. One of the reasons I picked this particular model, this kite, is the reviews were saying that it could handle the gusts fairly well. And it, compared to other kites, it can. Alright, so wind's dying. If you're curious how you pack this big thing up into a little package, I'll show you. If not, have a nice day. Go watch another video. Step 1, anchor it. At this point, I usually like to take my harness off, just because these things are, well, they're not the most comfortable. They look and probably feel a lot like a big diaper. I wouldn't know. One thing when you're flying a big kite, always bring something to weigh it down. If you have a friend, your friend can act as a weight. But if you're on your own, a lot of times I use the board, the mountain board. Today I have my Camelback. So step 1, I usually like to find the center of the kite. and I pull it back so there's some slack in the lines. This is, of course, much easier or much harder in windy conditions. A lot of times you have to modify what you're doing just so you can cope with the winds. And here's how I work it. There's lots of different ways to do it. I grab all my lines from one side, pile them on top of the kite, grab the corner, fold it into the center. The nice thing is I got that little triangle there to mark where the center is. Make sure you keep all your lines on the inside because you do not want them going around the outside, because when you bring it out the next time, that's really bad news. If one of your lines is around the outside of the kite, what'll happen is part of the kite, like this side, will inflate and start moving, and that side will not. The kite will just flip over and hit the ground really hard. And you actually can burst these kites if you hit them hard enough on the ground, because they act like a giant balloon when they're inflated. And if you hit that hard enough, it'll burst, and that's bad news and very expensive repairs. So don't do it. Just make sure your lines are all nice and tucked away. Kind of make sure everything's straight. The nicer job you do now, the better it is when you bring it out the next time. And I like to do a second fold to the center. Again, same thing with the lines. Make sure they're tucked in. As long as you tuck them in the bottom, the next time you bring it out, they'll all come out the same way. And coming out the same way is towards your handles. At this point, I like to grab the lines into the center, fold the kite in half, kind of get some of the air out of it. And then do one more halvesies. And then when it's right there, put my bag on it. Put it at this end, whichever end's facing the wind, therefore it can't come open if that end's dead. One thing I'm going to need when I come back to the kite is this loop. I keep it on me. I'll show you what it does when we get back there, but I'm going to need it over there. Alright, go back here. Don't need my stake anymore. Ooh, stuck in the ground. This is one part where, if anybody's watching this and has some useful advice, I've always done it, or not always, but I've done it this way where I pull my stuff into the center. If you have a better way so this comes out less tangled, please let me know. This is the same control handle I was using. They have these nice little hooks on the end so you can wrap everything, and I already messed up a little bit. So we're just going to back up and start over. Get everything so you can make sure the lines are roughly the same length when you start. Therefore everything will come out a little better in the end. This is the hardest part probably about wrapping the lines, is the start, because everything's so bulky. You have a lot thicker lines. And if you're noticing, I'm actually wrapping this in a figure 8. So a crossover in the center. That's actually very important if you fly any kites, possibly beyond the single string kites. What happens if I just wrap this around this way is when I pull my lines back off, for every wrap I put in the kite or around the handle, that puts one full twist in the line itself, and you can't see that. But what happens over time is they get knotted and they start wanting to curl in on themselves, and it's just really bad for the lines. Bad idea. That also applies to stuff like extension cords. If you've ever had an extension cord that has all those loopsies in it, I'm willing to bet that you wrap it in a circle instead of a figure 8. And therefore, what happens is every time you unspool it, it's putting twists in the cord, and especially on the inside of the cord. And that just kind of compounds the problems over time. So wrap your stuff in figure 8. All your stuff, your cords, the lines, climbing rope if you do that thing. So I don't know if you just noticed that, but it also has these little elastics on the end that keep the line on there. And then I put this on the kite itself and then just start rolling. And they see me rolling. And one of the other reasons I do my kite the way I do it is because the top of the kite has all the openings in it. And since that's still at the top here, all the air is being pushed out of it. If I were to roll it the other way, it would trap all the air and it kind of acts like a balloon, and then it just kind of stays in there. It does get out, but it takes forever and it's a pain. Got our little sleeping bag strappy thing. Basically just keeps it all while it's in the bag. Crank down on that, and you have one kite burrito. So stuff it all back in the bag and be good to go next time. Thanks for watching, and see you around.